The events of February 28, 2026 did not emerge from nowhere. They were the product of years of escalating tension, covert warfare, and strategic calculation that had been building steadily since the earliest days of the Islamic Republic. To understand the magnitude of what happened that Saturday morning in Tehran, it is necessary to understand the man at the center of it, the system he built, and the forces that ultimately brought both to an end. Ali Khamenei had ruled Iran for nearly 4 decades, ascending to the position of Supreme Leader in 1989 following the death of the revolution's founder, Ayatollah Khomeini. From the moment he took power, Khamenei pursued a singular strategic vision rooted in the belief that Iran's survival depended on its ability to project force beyond its own borders through a carefully cultivated network of armed proxies, political allies, and ideological partners stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. He called this network the axis of resistance, and for decades it served as both a shield and a sword, deterring direct confrontation with Israel and the United States while allowing Iran to wage war by other means across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon was the crown jewel of this network, a sophisticated military and political organization that Khamenei had nurtured into one of the most capable non-state armed forces in the world. Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza served as instruments of pressure against Israel's southern border. The Houthi movement in Yemen gave Iran a foothold on the Arabian Peninsula and the ability to threaten one of the world's most critical maritime shipping lanes. Shia militias in Iraq provided strategic depth and a land corridor connecting Tehran to Beirut. The Assad government in Syria served as the geographic linchpin that held the entire architecture together. For Khamenei, this web of relationships was not simply a foreign policy tool. It was the foundation of Iran's entire security doctrine, the means by which a country with a struggling economy and aging conventional military could punch far above its weight on the world stage. But by early 2026, that architecture had been largely dismantled. The process had accelerated dramatically following the Hamas attack on Israel in October 2023, an assault that triggered a military response of such ferocity and duration that it fundamentally altered the strategic landscape of the entire region. Israel's campaign in Gaza, however controversial internationally, degraded Hamas as a functioning military organization to the point where it could no longer serve as a credible instrument of Iranian strategy. Hezbollah, drawn into the conflict along Israel's northern border, suffered a series of catastrophic blows, including the elimination of much of its senior leadership and the destruction of vast quantities of the precision missiles Iran had spent years and billions of dollars supplying. The fall of Bashar al-Assad's government in Damascus in late 2024 severed the critical overland supply route between Iran and Lebanon, cutting off Hezbollah from its primary source of resupply. The Houthis continued their campaign of missile and drone attacks against Israeli territory and Red Sea shipping, but they too faced sustained military pressure from American and Israeli forces that degraded their capabilities significantly over time. By the beginning of 2026, Khamenei found himself in a position that would have been almost unimaginable just 3 years earlier. The proxies he had built were shattered or severely weakened. The geographic buffers he had constructed were gone. The deterrent that had protected Iran from direct military confrontation for decades had effectively collapsed. And yet, rather than recalibrate or seek a diplomatic off-ramp, Khamenei doubled down. In the weeks immediately preceding the February 28 strike, Iranian security forces carried out a brutal crackdown on domestic dissent that resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of Iranian civilians, a massacre that drew international condemnation, and according to multiple intelligence assessments, played a significant role in hardening Washington's resolve to support Israel's planned operation. The planning for what would become the largest combined American-Israeli military operation in history had been underway for months. American and Israeli commanders worked through an extraordinarily complex operational puzzle. Iran's air defense network, while damaged, still posed a serious threat to aircraft. Its nuclear facilities were buried under mountains of reinforced concrete specifically designed to survive conventional strikes. Its ballistic missile arsenal, which could reach Israel and American bases across the region within minutes, had to be neutralized before it could be brought to bear. And the Iranian leadership itself, which had spent decades studying Israeli and American military tactics and hardening its own command and control infrastructure against exactly this kind of attack, would need to be struck with a speed and simultaneity that would prevent any organized response. The solution to this puzzle came in the form of a layered, multi-domain assault of extraordinary scale. The United States contributed its own formidable military assets, including strategic bombers capable of delivering the most powerful bunker-busting munitions in the American arsenal, naval strike groups positioned in the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf, and electronic warfare platforms designed to blind Iran's air defense radar networks in the critical opening minutes of the attack. Israel contributed its fighter aircraft, its precision-guided munitions, and most critically, the intelligence that made the entire operation possible. That intelligence represented perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire undertaking. Israeli intelligence services had, over the course of years, managed to penetrate the highest levels of the Iranian regime with a depth and precision that astonished even experienced observers. The assassination of a senior Hamas leader inside a Revolutionary Guard guest house in Tehran in July 2024 had offered the world a glimpse of just how deeply Israeli intelligence had embedded itself within Iran's most sensitive institutions. But the full extent of that penetration only became clear on the morning of February 28, when Israeli planners were able to identify not just the location of the Supreme Leader's compound, but the precise underground shelter he was expected to occupy, the movements of his senior advisors, and the locations of at least 2 additional gatherings of senior Iranian officials taking place simultaneously in different parts of the city. The decision to strike during daylight hours on the first day of the Iranian workweek in the middle of Ramadan and on the Jewish Sabbath was itself a product of that intelligence work. Iranian security planners had long operated on the assumption that any Israeli or American military operation would follow established patterns, striking at night under the cover of darkness. The decision to accelerate the timeline and launch in the late morning was a deliberate psychological and tactical choice designed to exploit
Strictly an
precisely that
advisory
assumption.
and training
Tehran was
role,
not on a war footing.
not as
Government
combat
officials
forces,
were at work.
while all
Military
activities
commanders
will
were
be
in
carried
meetings.
out under the command and
Supreme
control of the
Leader was
Nigerian
gathered with
government
his closest
and in
advisors.
close
The
coordination with
conditions
the
for a
armed forces.
decapitation strike of
Secretary,
historic
the
proportions had
collaboration
aligned in a
aimed at
way that
enhancing
might never
Nigeria's
come again,
capacity to
and the
counter
commanders
terrorist
overseeing
threats
the operation
and
made the
improve the protection of
determination that
vulnerable
waiting was not an
communities
option.
nationwide.
At 9:27 in the morning, the
Nigerians will
strike
engage
began.
in joint
The opening
training and
minutes were characterized by
intelligence-focused
speed and precision that
cooperation with
overwhelmed
the
Iran's ability
advisors
to
to
respond.
strengthen their
Electronic
ability to
warfare systems
identify
degraded the
and
radar networks
neutralize
protecting
extremist
Tehran
groups.
before Iranian air
The armed
defense
forces of
operators could
Nigeria
fully understand what
reaffirm
was
their
happening.
commitment to defeating
Bunker-busting munitions
terrorist
of extraordinary power
organizations
drove through layer
strictly in
after layer of
advisory and
reinforced
training
concrete to
roles,
Khamenei's
not
compound.
as combat forces, while
Simultaneously,
all
across dozens
activities
of
will be
sites in
carried
western
out
and
under
central
the
Iran,
command and control of the
American and
Nigerian
Israeli
government
strikes
and
systematically
in
destroyed
close
ballistic missile
coordination
launch
with the
sites,
armed
nuclear
forces
enrichment
of
facilities,
Nigeria. The
IRGC command
collaboration
centers,
aimed
and
at
air defense
enhancing Nigeria's
installations in a
capacity
coordinated
to counter
campaign
terrorist
designed to
threats
eliminate both
and
the
improve the
regime's leadership
protection of
and its
vulnerable
ability to retaliate in a
communities
single,
nationwide.
overwhelming blow.
Nigerian troops
The
will
human toll
engage in
within the
joint
Iranian
training and
leadership was staggering.
intelligence-focused
Beyond Khamenei
cooperation
himself,
with the
the strikes killed
advisors
men who had
to
collectively
strengthen their
represented the
ability to
institutional backbone
identify
of the
and
Islamic
neutralize
Republic's military and
extremist
security
groups.
apparatus for
The armed
decades.
forces of
The
Nigeria
IRGC commander,
reaffirm
the
their
defense
commitment
minister,
to
the
defeating
intelligence chief,
terrorist
the head of the Supreme
organizations
Leader's military office,
strictly in
and the
advisory
secretary of the
and
Defense
training
Council were all
roles,
gone within the
not as
first hour.
combat
These were
forces,
not simply
while all
bureaucratic
activities
positions.
will be carried out
They were
under the
men who
command
held
and
the
control of the
relationships,
Nigerian
the
government
institutional
and
knowledge,
in
and the
close
personal
coordination
authority
with
that
the armed
allowed the
forces
Iranian
of
security state to
Nigeria.
function.
The
Their
collaboration aimed at
simultaneous
enhancing
elimination
Nigeria's
did not
capacity
just
to
remove
counter terrorist
individuals,
threats
it severed the
and
networks
improve the
of trust
protection of
and
vulnerable
communication upon which the
communities
entire system
nationwide.
depended.
Nigerian troops will
Inside
engage
Iran,
in
the
joint
immediate
training and
aftermath was
intelligence-focused
characterized by a
cooperation
profound and
with the
disorienting
advisors to
uncertainty.
strengthen their
State
ability to
television
identify
broadcast
and
scenes of
neutralize
grief and
extremist
pro-government
groups.
mourning, as it
The
was
armed forces
designed to
of
do.
Nigeria
The
reaffirm
images
their
that
commitment
circulated
to
on
defeating
social media and were verified by international journalists told a different story. Neighborhoods across Tehran and in cities throughout the country, Iranians who had lived under the Islamic Republic their entire lives took to the streets not to mourn but to celebrate. They chanted slogans that would have brought swift and brutal punishment just days earlier. They expressed openly a sentiment that surveys and underground networks had long suggested was widespread, but had never before been able to surface publicly with such force. For many ordinary Iranians, the man whose face had stared down from billboards and government buildings for nearly 4 decades was not a beloved leader, but a symbol of repression, economic failure, international isolation, and state violence. The constitutional and political crisis that followed the strike was unlike anything the Islamic Republic had ever faced. The body responsible under Iranian law for selecting a new supreme leader, the Assembly of Experts, was unable to convene in any meaningful way while airstrikes continued and the security situation in Tehran remained chaotic. The chain of command within the IRGC, which had always served as the ultimate guarantor of the regime's survival, had been shattered by the elimination of its senior leadership. No figure with the religious authority, the institutional backing, and the political relationships necessary to claim succession had been publicly designated. The Islamic Republic, an institution built around the concept of the supreme leader as the embodiment of divine authority on earth, found itself without a supreme leader for the first time in its history. What came next remained deeply uncertain. Regional powers watched with a mixture of anxiety and calculation, each beginning to assess what the collapse or transformation of the Iranian state might mean for their own interests. American officials spoke carefully of hoping for a peaceful transition toward a government that could reintegrate Iran into the international community.
The gathering of Iran's top leadership presented a target of opportunity that could not be allowed to pass. At approximately 9:27 in the morning Tehran time, the skies over Iran erupted. Roughly 200 Israeli fighter jets, in the largest military flyover in the history of the Israeli Air Force, launched a synchronized assault on over 500 targets across western and central Iran in full coordination with the United States military. The first wave of Israeli strikes was aimed directly at Iran's political and security nerve center in Tehran, the Supreme Leader's compound, the Presidential Palace, the Ministry of Intelligence, the Ministry of Defense, and the headquarters